All right, good morning and welcome to Coffee and Questions. So this morning I've had heaps of good questions come through and I've picked one of them to kind of talk about, which Berkey asked me last week. He wanted to know how to break his beer and pizza habit. And Bec has said that she definitely wants that covered today. So we're going to focus on that one today. And the other questions that came through, which are completely unrelated, I might add them to the schedule for next week or a couple of weeks' time. Good morning, everyone that's joining on Insta. If you're here, let me know that you're here and say hi. There's no one on Facebook just yet. So the question that I got asked by Berkey last week was, how to break his pizza and beer habit. And I'm not sure if he's serious or not, but he's just done CAN 70.3 and did a lot of drinking. Before and after. I don't know about during, but we can talk about that. And then Bec has also sort of commented, good morning, Kazla. Good morning, Liv. Good to see you getting up early, Liv. Bec has asked me to make sure I do cover it this week because we didn't talk about it last week because I wasn't sure Berkey was serious. But Bec wants it covered, talking about alcohol and exercise and kind of the effects that alcohol has on the body. So I'm going to try and tackle that a little bit today. Now, I find alcohol quite difficult to talk about in this sort of setting. I think it needs quite an individualized approach, drinking alcohol and performance. So I'll see how we go, talking at you. So feel free to, send me a comment, send me a question as we're going, so this can be nice and interactive and I'm not just talking at you about alcohol. Good morning, Robson. All right, so I guess with alcohol, right, I'm not here to say, look, don't ever drink. Like at the end of the day, I am a dietitian and we know that alcohol is a toxin. So we don't need it, right? It can't be stored anywhere in our body. We don't store it like we store carbohydrate in our muscles. It doesn't get used to build muscles. We don't store it anywhere. Good morning, M5. Liv said beer equals carb loading, right? So alcohol is a toxin and it gets excreted and burnt before anything else in preference to whatever you're eating. So if you're eating a meal and drinking, the alcohol calories and energy gets broken down and then excreted, like detoxified through the liver and then excreted out through your kidneys. Good morning. Is it Phil online or have we got Maddie online under M5 management? Who is it? So I just wanted to kind of say that up front that I'm not here to say don't ever drink, but I guess you need to understand a little bit about alcohol and what it is, and it's not needed for the body for any purpose. It's used like as a social lubricant to relax. I guess it's also a socially acceptable toxin, and a lot of Australians have a really heavy drinking culture. So let's just say that up front, right? Alcohol is a toxin, we don't need it, but I also understand that people drink. And it's trying to find a balance between drinking and over drinking if we're talking about exercise and performance. And that's kind of the stuff I want to tackle today. So like if you are a heavy drinker, then I'd be talking to you differently to somebody that might just have, a glass of wine or something on a Friday night. So I guess there's different sort of levels of drinking and the conversation that I would have with you around that would be different depending on the type of drinker that you are. And I guess also your goals too, right? So alcohol is, in terms of like calories per gram, it's up there with fat. It's 29 calories per gram. So you've got the calories of the alcohol, the ethanol, plus also whatever you're drinking it with. So a lot of people kind of drink now vodka, lime and soda or gin and diet tonic, those sorts of things, because then they're just getting purely the calories from the alcohol component. They're not drinking it with, say, Coke, like a rum and Coke, or say gin with normal tonic, or, cocktails that are laden with stuff. Like I'm thinking espresso martinis that have got, cream and stuff in them. So they are quite calorie dense alcohol drinks. There's a lot of sort of low carb, low alcohol beers coming on the market too, which is interesting. And there's actually a no alcohol beer bar opened up in Melbourne, which I also think is quite interesting. Good morning, Strong Arm UK. What are you doing online? So let's try and talk about alcohol and performance and exercise, because that's my forte as a sports dietitian. But I just wanted to say that stuff up front, that, you know, we don't need alcohol in our life. I understand that people drink, and that's fine, but I guess try and do it strategically around exercise, and we'll talk about that today. So with Cairns, that's just happened on the weekend, I know that a lot of athletes have just done an Ironman and then gone to the pub. Good morning. All right, so M5 management, is this Phil or Maddie? How many calories in red wine? Yeah, so with red wine, like if we're talking about calories per like gram, you've got the ethanol of the wine, plus there is some calories in the actual like wine component too. It's grapes, right? So I wouldn't say it's as high as like a cocktail that's got cream in it and things like that, but it would be higher than vodka and soda water. Hey, Phil. But it's not that high necessarily. The thing with alcohol, if we take a step back to that, then the thing with alcohol is that, yes, it's burned preferentially to anything else. And so while that's happening, if you're having a couple of drinks and then that's taking a while for that to process. So we know that about one standard drink takes roughly an hour to process and get rid of. Which is why like the standard drinks for males and women's to then keep your level under a certain limit to drive exists, because we know how long it takes to process a standard drink roughly. But while that's happening, because the body is working hard to get rid of that, because it's a toxin, it's just storing everything else. So you're more likely to be storing fat while you're drinking, because the calories from the food that you're eating while you're drinking just get stored for later, because they're not going to get burnt off in that time. I guess one drink does not equal a standard drink as well, if we want to talk about that. A standard drink, like of wine, is 100 mils. And I don't know anybody that drinks 100 mils. And even a restaurant pour of wine, which is quite small, is 150 mils. So it's still more than a standard drink. So one drink doesn't always equal a drink. And if you drink beer or anything like that, that's got a label and you can turn it around and go have a look at how many standard drinks it is. It's sometimes one, but if you're drinking like those really dark, rich beers, then they can be sort of 2 standard drinks in a can. So have a look at how many standards you're getting too. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation. So back to our Cairns athletes who have just done an Ironman, probably one of the biggest onslaughts on their body they'll ever do or have done. And then they go to the pub and drink. That's kind of what we're talking about today, right? So I always say to my athletes to make sure that they like tick their recovery boxes first before going to the pub. And we'll learn about that today, why I get them to do that. Now, when we're talking about the recovery window after exercise, there's 4 things that you need to do. And there's potentially, like there's more, but there's 4 sort of big bang for your buck nutrition elements that I would suggest you achieve. And, you know, does anyone know what they are? If you're in a consult with me, I'd be asking you, but on this sort of forum, it might be difficult, but somebody talk to me, please. All right, so the four R's of recovery that I like people to tick off before they go to the pub are repair, and that's putting some protein into the system after exercise to kind of, like, for a number of reasons, but help with the muscle recovery and repair and muscle protein synthesis, and it helps you to adapt from the exercise session that you've done. We want to refuel, and that's putting carbohydrate back into the tank after you've just emptied it for an Ironman, or at least sort of used a fair bit of it for other shorter events. Good morning, Alana. And then we want to make sure we're rehydrating, and, you know, water is fine. There's some pretty cool studies on like the best liquid to rehydrate with. Like there's been, you know, milk, beer, water, sports drink, and I guess any liquid is fine, particularly if you're eating in that recovery window. You don't necessarily have to have something specific to recover. And yeah, water is fine, particularly if you're eating with food. The last R, which a lot of people don't kind of know or understand or get when I ask this question, is revitalize. And that's trying to put some vitamins and minerals back into the system as well, because a lot of them are precursors for your recovery pathways. And it's also just a really good habit to get into, is having like a nice range of foods on your plate. You're going to get more bang for your buck if you do that. So as an example, in that recovery window, say it's breakfast, instead of just having eggs on toast and that's it, try and put your eggs on toast with some colour. So spinach, tomato, mushrooms, like a ratatouille type thing. Some healthy fats like avocado can be useful, or olive oil if you're cooking in that. And they have good anti-inflammatory properties, which is good after exercise too. So if we're talking about recovery, I want you to do all those things first before you drink alcohol. There is some really cool research in beer. Dr. Ben Desborough, dietitian, has been doing lots of cool beer studies at Griffith Uni. I'm not sure if anybody has seen those or heard about them, but he's like the beer research man, beer and caffeine, but yeah, beer in particular. So they kind of get athletes drunk and see what happens. That's a much more detailed than that, but you know, it sounds like fun study. Phil said he nailed his recovery. Good work. That's because you have a recovery nutrition plan, Phil. And yeah, hopefully you did that before you then went to the pub after cans. Okay, so do those 4 things before you go and drink alcohol, because, you know, potentially if you start drinking and don't do those things first, then the beer's more likely, I say beer, but it could be anything. The alcohol is more likely to displace the other important nutrients that you're meant to be getting. Like, you're more likely to make poor food choices if you've had a few drinks. And, you know, I'm thinking hot chips or nachos, like things that don't have enough protein for you. So your alcohol is going to potentially make that recovery process not as good, because you're not eating the right things that you should be doing. And I guess with alcohol, there's 2 things that come to mind, which I wanted to talk about today, is like 1, dehydration, because alcohol has a diuretic effect. And 2, I guess alcohol affects muscle protein synthesis. So they're the other 2 components when we talk about alcohol and exercise. So if you're going to drink, we need to do things strategically so that you're not doing those things. You're not really affecting your rehydration, or you're making yourself more dehydrated, or you're also sort of eating away at your muscles by blocking those muscle protein synthesis pathways. So if you're interested in the beer research, have a look up Dr. Ben Desborough. Potentially, I don't know if anybody's seen, but on the down low, there's going to be a podcast happening, and I might get Dr. Ben to talk about beer and his research with exercise. He's pretty cool dude. So just a little to touch on his research a little bit, like in the dehydration sense, they've done a lot of research around the best fluids for rehydration, and then like, does drinking beer then therefore cause dehydration? And so a quick summary of that research is that the lower percent beers, so like 1%, 2%, 3% beers, if you had a beer, don't seem to cause dehydration effects. But it's not till you're getting to, say, 4% alcohol, which would be a standard sort of like full strength beer. That's when the poorer fluid retention sort of kicks in, the diuretic effect kicks in. So I guess that's something to be mindful of, is that if you want to have a beer, maybe some of the lower strength beers or lower strength alcohols to start with might be a good place, so that you're not affecting your hydration. But if you're having like higher strength beers, then you are going to have that diuretic effect. You know how you're drinking and you break the seal and then you just can't stop going to the toilet? That's kind of what, like, that's what happens like with the diuretic effect. You turn off that signal to then retain fluid, and you just start peeing it all out. And you don't go to the toilet and it's dark. You go to the toilet and your urine color is really clear, right? So it's that diuretic effect just pushing fluid out through your kidneys. So that's important to be mindful of. I think a lot of people might have experienced that, like breaking the seal type situation, and that's where that signal then is gone for you to retain fluid, and the diuretic effect kicks in and you just start pushing fluid out. That effect can be moderated by having sodium. There is some research around adding sodium to beer. I don't know if I recommend it. but I would probably suggest more so having food that's salty to help with more fluid retention if you are drinking. And a good summary of that research is that, you know, if you're having a beer after exercise, even if it's a 4% one, the solute load of beer is actually not too bad for rehydration. But if it's getting up to multiple beers, then you're probably doing a bit more damage. So this is actually recorded, but, you know, a beer is probably okay. 2-3 beers, depending on how big you are, might also be okay, but any more than that and you're potentially getting too much alcohol, too much dehydration, and, you know, questionable if you're displacing other nutrients by having that much alcohol too. So for some people, having 3 beers is a big night, or 3 drinks. So I guess it's important to think about that. Like a smaller athlete, you know, someone of my size or a smaller female, can probably not get away with as much as a bigger athlete, because the alcohol content, like in terms of the research, is grams per kilo. And so a 50 kilo female, their grams per kilo is obviously much lower than a 90 kilo athlete. So I guess it depends on your size too, which is why I think it's really individualized, and it's hard to talk in this sort of group environment about that. All right, and then in terms of protein, I guess there's one study, it's pretty old now, I'd probably have to go reread it, but, you know, this is just thinking back to uni days. Alcohol actually blocks the muscle protein synthesis pathways, and I'm not sure what dose they gave them in the study. I'd have to go and look it up. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, like in terms of alcohol. But yeah, alcohol does block those muscle protein synthesis pathways. And even when it's given with protein, that was kind of the summary of that study. Given alcohol with protein still blocks muscle protein synthesis. So I guess be mindful of that too when you're drinking. So I talked to some of my clients. I don't know if she's online on Facebook. There's a bunch of people on Facebook. Tell me if you're here. You're silently watching and I can't see that you're here. We talk about drinking strategically so that she doesn't drink around big training sessions and big training days, because she's probably affecting her muscle recovery by drinking. Now, her husband owns a winery. I get it. Wine, you know, she's got to be like the chief taste tester, but it's done strategically so that it's not around big, long weekend rides. You know, drinking maybe more so on a rest day, where you're not doing the dehydration, muscle protein waste, like synthesis blocking type effects, where she's really trying to focus on adapting from the exercise, right? So a lot of athletes will stop drinking heading into a big event, and I think that's probably wise, as long as that doesn't then create an all or none mentality around drinking. So a lot of people have a switch on and a switch off button, and I try and train that out of people because I don't think that's particularly helpful. As an example, I have an Ironman athlete who's done 2 Ironmans with me now, and I see him for 20 weeks heading into his Ironman. And he loses 10 kilos every time, and he gets to his ideal race weight, and then he absolutely blows out afterwards in the off season and comes back again, and we have to repeat the process. So this time he's just done Cairns. This time he's booked in next week and we're going to tackle that. He's not going to do the switch on, switch off, all or none approach this time. He's actually going to do a better job of maintaining his body composition and actually putting in place good, healthy eating habits so that he doesn't absolutely blow out in between, and then use an Ironman to bring his weight back down. Like that to me is not great psyche. So we're going to tackle that this time. And I guess in terms of alcohol, you know, the same sort of thing. He doesn't drink heading into an Ironman at all. And then afterwards it's like the floodgates open. And I don't think that's particularly useful either. So there is some evidence around, say, red wine being beneficial, polyphenols and other sort of food chemicals, but it's in a small dose, and it's not like the binge drinking culture that Australians would have. So you can also get those polyphenols that come from red wine from other things in food. You don't have to drink red wine to get them. And I think that's also important to recognise. So in terms of protein, alcohol and blocking muscle protein synthesis, I think I think that's really important to understand. And if you're drinking strategically around exercise or away from exercise, that will be much more useful than doing a massive Ironman and going to the pub. So I always tell my Ironman athletes to do those 4 hours of recovery first before going to the pub. And, you know, after an Ironman, you potentially don't feel like going and having a beer. Some people might. Like, if you think about it beforehand, you just can't wait to do it. But in that instance, it's not usual that people will have a beer that night. It's usually the next day. And so then they've had a bit more opportunity to do a good job of their recovery before they go and dehydrate themselves and potentially block muscle protein synthesis. All right, there's a bunch of people online. Good morning, everyone on Insta. If you have any questions, please type them in now. I can't see anything on the old Facey. It's 20 minutes already. Time flies when you're having fun. So Liv's question really early on, which I can't believe I still remember, but she asked if, you know, beer was carb loading. And yes, there's carbs in beer, but there's definitely, I definitely wouldn't recommend drinking beer for carb loading. We talked about carb loading maybe last week on Coffee and Question. So go back and watch the replay if you missed that one. That was a good one, because I find a lot of people don't actually know how to carb load properly. And it doesn't, just like eating a pasta meal the night before your race is not carb loading, right? So making sure that you do carb loading properly and get a structured plan with a dietitian to actually carb load effectively. Otherwise, really all you're doing is having a big pasta meal, which is probably like a 1/5 to a 1/10 of what your needs are in the day to actually effectively carb load. Liv just sent me some beer emojis. All right, if there's no questions, I might kind of try and wrap up. Try to, because it's 20 minutes, smashed it. But that would be a good sort of, well, that would be my summary take-home message for today with alcohol and performance is, you know, a beer is probably not that detrimental in your overall plan. If your other goals have been met, like in terms of recovery, you're at the body composition that you want to be. So just remembering that alcohol is quite high in calories, but it also blocks the burning of other macronutrients in our meal. So it's going to be burnt off in preference to carbs, protein, fat. And so we just store all those things. So, you know, alcohol can be included if you aren't like trying to make headway with your body composition, or you're not really struggling with recovery and you're not tired and those sorts of things. Like alcohol, if you're feeling tired and run down and alcohol's kind of not necessarily causing that, but it's, you know, part of that big picture, then I'd look at maybe reducing your alcohol intake. But if you're somebody that enjoys, you know, a glass of wine, you know, once or twice a week, like I don't really necessarily think there's too much of a problem with that. It's when drinking gets beyond that that it can be an issue in terms of performance. But, you know, if we're talking about elite triathletes, they don't drink in season either. But I guess, you know, triathlon is their job and their body is their temple, right? So, yeah, like depends what sort of mindset you have too. If you have an elite athlete mindset, or if you're just more of a like regular punter age grouper, just doing it for fun, then, you know, eating for performance is potentially not as important to you as others. So that's why I think it's like quite difficult to have this conversation in a group setting. I think it's quite individualized because there's more components to alcohol intake than just drinking or not drinking. Because I understand that, you know, drinking for people is, you know, part of their culture or part of their lifestyle. It's just having an understanding of, one, what it does. So blocks muscle protein synthesis, is a diuretic, so it has some effects on dehydration if we're getting, you know, above a certain threshold. And probably not so well timed right after an Ironman in particular, or one of the biggest stresses on your body. All right, so on the triathlon nutrition topic, before I wrap up, if you are a triathlete and you want to know how well you're doing with your nutrition, please jump onto the website and get my free triathlon nutrition checklist. So it's dietitianapproved.com.au/checklist. You can jump on there and grab that and download that for free. And there's 50 sort of steps to see how you're going with your nutrition for triathlon, whether you're nailing it or there's certain areas that you need to improve on. It'll show you really quickly what what you're doing and where some gaps are that you can kind of work on with a sports dietitian. All right, and so again, that website is dietitianapproved.com.au/checklist. Jump on there, it's free, and yeah, have a go. And if you do it and you get some results, then jump onto the Dietitian Approved Crew Facebook group and let me know how you've gone. I'd love to know how people are going. There's quite a few people that have got that, but I haven't heard to see how everyone has been faring in their triathlon nutrition mastery. All right, Facebook, you've been super quiet over there. Insta's been going off. Insta's where it's at. But I will sign off now for coffee and questions. And we are taking a break next week. And I'll be back the week after that. So I've got a few cool things coming in the pipeline. So there'll be no coffee and questions next week, but we'll be back the week after. So send your questions through. We've got some other good ones from today that we could potentially cover next week if none come through. But yeah, 1 week hiatus. We're back in 2 weeks. All right, that's it from me. I will see you guys soon. You.